Close your eyes. Imagine you're sick. Not just a little sick, the kind of sick where your body feels like it's been hijacked. Your skin is burning with fever, your joints ache like you've aged 50 years overnight, and worst of all, a tender swelling has erupted under your arm. It throbs. It's red. It's about to burst. Congratulations. You've woken up in the 14th century with the bubonic plague. And your medieval doctor has the cure. You're expecting medicine. A healing draft. Maybe some herbs. At the very least, a prayer. What you get instead is a chicken. A live chicken. Now, before you start laughing, or crying, understand this. To a medieval doctor, this wasn't a joke. This was science. Or at least, their version of it. According to the medical theory of the day, disease was caused by imbalances of the body's humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. The plague, in their eyes, wasn't about bacteria or fleas. It was about poison, filth, and corrupted air clogging up the body. And the only way to fix it was to draw that poison out. Which brings us back to the chicken. The method was simple, if horrifying. The doctor would pluck the feathers off a chicken's rear end until the bare, warm flesh was exposed. Then, brace yourself, they would press the chicken's naked backside directly onto your swollen bubo. That tender, pus-filled lump in your armpit or groin. Yes. That's where the bird goes. The belief was that the living flesh of the chicken would suck the poison out of your body like a sponge. As the bubo shrank, the chicken would supposedly sicken and even die, having absorbed your plague into itself. And if you didn't get better? Easy. Just grab another chicken. Imagine this scene. You're lying half dead in your straw bed, fever sweating through your clothes, while a grim-faced doctor holds a squawking bird to your flesh. The chicken is flapping, pecking, furious, while you writhe in agony. It's disgusting, humiliating, and completely ineffective. But in a world without antibiotics, without even the faintest idea of germs, this was considered cutting-edge treatment. And here's the kicker. Sometimes the patient did get better. Not because of the chicken, of course, but because plague was unpredictable. Some people died in a day. Some lingered for weeks. Some, rarely, survived. To a medieval doctor, this was proof the method worked. The chicken had absorbed the poison. Praise be to God. On to the next patient. Now pause for a moment. You're probably wondering, did anyone believe this was absurd? The answer is complicated. In the 14th century, medicine was a strange cocktail of ancient Greek philosophy, astrology, religion, and desperate improvisation. Most people didn't have the knowledge, or the freedom, to question the doctor. If the church and the learned men of the universities said a chicken but could cure the plague, who were you to argue? Besides, it wasn't like there were better options. But think of the sensory reality. The smell of unwashed bodies in a plague-ridden town. The cries of the dying echoing through the streets. The air itself heavy with the stench of rot and fear. And in the middle of it all, a doctor, dressed not yet in the famous beaked plague mask but in long robes, holding up a chicken like some bizarre ritual sacrifice. This was medicine as survival theater, equal parts superstition and desperation. It's easy for us to mock. Sitting here centuries later with clean syringes, antibiotics, and hospitals. But ask yourself, would you survive it? Could you lie still while a bird's body was pressed against your wound, feathers scratching your skin, claws digging into your thigh, your doctor muttering Latin prayers? Could you endure the humiliation of being told this was your best chance? Most of us wouldn't. Not because of the plague itself, though, let's be honest. That would finish us off, but because of the sheer horror of the cure. In the Middle Ages, Your suffering didn't end with disease. It was amplified by the remedies meant to save you. And as you'll soon see, the chicken was only the beginning. So, the chicken didn't work. Or maybe it did. If you believe the priest who insists your fever has gone down. Though in reality you're just too weak to keep thrashing. But your doctor isn't done. Oh no. He's got an entire medical playbook at his disposal. And every page is a new form of torture dressed up as healing. Let's start with bloodletting. This was the cornerstone of medieval medicine. The idea came straight from ancient Greek physicians like Galen, whose writings were still gospel 1,000 years later. The theory was simple: if you were sick, your humors were out of balance. Too much blood, too much phlegm, too much bile. Solution: get rid of the excess. How do you get rid of blood? By opening a vein. Picture this. You're lying on a rough wooden bench while your doctor brings out a knife, dull from overuse, and a bowl. No sterilization. No gloves, no antiseptic. Just a slice to the forearm or ankle and a stream of your life pouring into the bowl. The doctor watches carefully, counting the drops, measuring your weakness against his own sense of proportion. When you begin to faint, he decides you've had enough. Congratulations, you're lighter now. Lighter in blood, lighter in hope. If knives were too crude, there were leeches. Slimy, wriggling little parasites placed directly on your skin to suck away the illness. In some cases, they'd be put near the buboes themselves, clinging and feeding until they grew fat and fell off. Imagine the sensation. Fever burning through your veins, a live leech gorging itself on your blood. And a doctor nodding approvingly as though this were the height of wisdom. To the medieval mind, this wasn't madness. It was balance. Every drop of blood removed was thought to cool the fever, to draw out the poison. To restore harmony to the body's inner world. And sometimes, just sometimes, the patient survived long enough to convince everyone it worked. Now, if you weren't being bled or leeched, you might be subjected to another remedy, poultices made of herbs, clay, or even animal dung. These were smeared onto wounds or buboes with the hope they would draw out the bad humors. The smell alone could kill a horse, but to desperate villagers, it was medicine. And then there were the fumes. Doctors believed plague could be chased away with strong smells. Vinegar, onions, burning herbs. Even smoke from a fire of juniper or rosemary. In practice, this meant filling your sickroom with choking clouds of smoke while you tried not to suffocate. Some physicians swore by holding a sponge soaked in vinegar to your nose. Others suggested sniffing flowers or perfumes, which, given the lack of sewage systems and abundance of rotting corpses, might have actually been a mercy. But the remedies didn't stop at what you inhaled. Some treatments were frankly absurd. A common prescription for plague sores was a paste made of crushed emeralds. That's right, ground-up gemstones. Of course. Only the wealthy could afford to grind their jewelry into powder and eat it with honey. For peasants like you, the doctor would recommend a mixture of dried toads, frog bile, or the ashes of burned snakes. If you vomited, that was considered a good sign. The poison was leaving your body. And through all this, you must remember, there was no privacy, no quiet dignity. You weren't alone in a sterile hospital bed. You were crammed into a smoky, crowded hut, family members coughing beside you, neighbors peeking in. The doctor muttering Latin prayers while shoving a chicken, a leech, or a stinking poultice onto your body. Healing was public, messy, and humiliating. Now here's the chilling truth. None of this helped. At best. Some of these treatments provided mild comfort, like a warm poultice easing pain, or herbs masking the smell of decay. At worst, they sped you toward the grave. Bloodletting weakened you further. Leeches left you vulnerable to infection. Dirty poultices invited more bacteria. But no one knew that. In a world without microscopes, without germ theory, without even soap, the line between medicine and harm was invisible. And still, people believed. Because belief was all they had. If your doctor said the stars demanded you be bled under a waning moon, you let him bleed you. If your priest said confession would heal your soul and maybe your body, you confessed. If the apothecary promised powdered emeralds or dried toads, you scraped together your coins. Hope, however painful, was always cheaper than despair. Now, put yourself there. Imagine your arm bleeding into a bowl while your body is already faint from fever. Imagine the crawling sensation of leeches sucking at your flesh. Imagine the sting of vinegar in your nose and the burning smoke of rosemary filling your lungs. Would you survive it? Not the plague, the cure. That's the real horror of medieval medicine. It wasn't just the disease that threatened you. It was the treatment. And tomorrow, if you live through the night, your doctor has even stranger ideas in store. You've survived the chicken. You've survived the leeches. You've survived being smoked like a side of beef over rosemary fire. But now word spreads through your village. A real plague doctor is coming. This isn't your local barber with a rusty blade. This is a man trained in the mysterious art of medicine. He studied at a university. Which means he can read Latin, quote Aristotle, and confidently explain why the moon's position in Aquarius is the reason you're coughing blood. In short, you're about to be examined by someone important. Someone terrifying. The first thing you notice is his outfit. It's unforgettable. He wears a long waxed cloak, thick gloves, and boots that look more suited to wading through swamps than visiting the sick. But it's the mask that makes your feverish heart skip a beat. A long, curved beak of leather protrudes from his face, with glass eyeholes that turn his gaze into two black, insect-like orbs. He looks less like a healer and more like a monstrous bird stalking through a nightmare. Why the beak? Believe it or not, this was considered high technology. The beak was stuffed with herbs, spices, and flowers, things like lavender, cloves, and rosemary. Sometimes even vinegar-soaked sponges. The idea was that the sweet or pungent scents would filter the miasma, the bad air thought to cause plague. If you could keep the foul air away from your nose, you could keep the disease away from your body. The doctor didn't look like a crow for fun. He looked that way because people believed it kept him alive. Now, imagine lying on your straw mat as this creature looms over you. He doesn't rush. He doesn't even speak much at first. He examines you through his glass lenses, taking in the swellings under your arms, the dark blotches spreading across your skin, the stench of infection that clings to your body. He might poke at you with a wooden cane, a safe distance tool so he doesn't have to touch you directly. You flinch at the prodding, but he only tilts his head, like a bird deciding whether its prey is worth eating. Once satisfied, he begins his ritual of treatment. More bloodletting. Of course. More poultices of herbs, clay, and animal parts. But the plague doctor also carries remedies of his own. A common one is theriac, a concoction originally developed in ancient Rome. It contained dozens of ingredients, spices, honey, opium, even bits of ground snake. It was expensive, bitter, and utterly useless against plague, but it was prescribed with confidence. If you could afford it, he might also prescribe fumigation. Burning sulfur or arsenic in your home to chase away the disease. The choking smoke would drive you and your family into the streets, gasping for air. But at least the bad spirits were cleansed, right? If you couldn't afford that, he might simply tell you to eat more herbs, drink more vinegar, or rub your sores with mercury. Yes, mercury. The same toxic metal that now comes with hazard warnings was once smeared directly onto plague boils in hopes of drawing out the poison. And then there were the religious treatments. A doctor might tell you to pray harder, confess your sins, or carry an amulet inscribed with holy words. One popular charm was the inscription abracadabra, written in a triangle that grew smaller with each line, as though the letters themselves would shrink your disease into nothingness. You might be half dead, but you'd clutch that piece of parchment like it was divine armor. Here's the haunting reality. Plague doctors weren't miracle workers. In fact, their survival rate wasn't much better than anyone else's. Many of them died despite their beaked masks and waxed cloaks. The outfit was better than nothing. But fleas didn't care about herbs, and rats didn't respect leather boots. Still, their very presence gave people hope. If a plague doctor came to your door, you felt seen, cared for, even if what he carried was more superstition than science. Now ask yourself, could you survive this experience? Could you lie still while a masked figure in a bird costume pressed mercury onto your open sores? Could you breathe sulfur smoke until your eyes watered, all while your body already burned with fever? Could you swallow theriac, an ancient cocktail of snake, opium, and spice, on an empty stomach while vomiting from plague? Survival wasn't just about enduring the disease. It was about enduring the cure, enduring the fear, enduring the sight of that terrible mask leaning over you. To a modern mind, it feels like a nightmare. But in the Middle Ages, it was the best hope you had. That wraps section 3. Do you want me to move ahead with the 15 Bruegel-style image prompts for this section now? You said. Next section ChatGPT said, perfect. Here's section 4 script, is almost equal to 400 words, for sleepy survival why medieval doctors rubbed chicken butts on plague wounds. Section 4, cures worse than the disease if you thought the chicken and the bird mask doctor were bad. Brace yourself. Because medieval medicine during plague years was a catalogue of human desperation. A grim buffet of cures that were often more dangerous than the disease itself. Let's start with bloodletting. By now, you're used to the idea that a doctor in this era believed your body was ruled by humors. Too much blood, too much bile, too much phlegm, imbalance meant sickness. The logical fix: drain it. So, out comes the knife. You, weak with fever, are tied down while your veins are sliced open and blood gushes into a bowl. The hope is that the bad blood leaves, the balance is restored, and your body fights off the plague. In reality, you're left dizzy, dehydrated, and closer to death. When knives weren't available, leeches took their place. Dozens of slimy worms attached to your skin, fattening themselves on your blood while you prayed not to faint. Imagine it, the writhing, the suction, the faint tickle turning into sharp pain. It wasn't just unpleasant. It could kill you faster than the disease by weakening what little strength you had left. Then there were poultices. Your doctor might smear your buboes with a paste of herbs and animal dung. Yes, dung. Cow manure was sometimes mixed with rose petals or vinegar and plastered onto your swollen lymph nodes. The mixture stank to high heaven, clung to your flesh, and burned like fire. But if the boil burst, everyone cheered. A burst bubo meant the poison had been expelled, even if you collapsed from infection a day later. Other cures were even stranger. Some doctors prescribed cutting open the buboes entirely and cauterizing them with hot irons. Picture this, your body already shaking from fever, and someone presses glowing metal against your raw skin. The smell of burning flesh fills the room. You scream until your throat gives out, while the doctor nods in satisfaction, believing he's burned the poison away. In truth, he's just added agony to agony. And then there was urine therapy. Yes, people were encouraged to drink their own urine or wash with it, believing it had purifying properties. Others tried bathing in vinegar, rubbing themselves with onions, or carrying smelly herbs like garlic in hopes of repelling the pestilence. Some even recommended sitting in sewers. thinking the stronger stench would drive out the weaker plague fumes. Imagine crouching in filth, gasping in the dark, trying to outsmell a disease. Perhaps the most theatrical cures came from religion. Flagellants marched through towns whipping themselves until their backs bled, believing that their pain would appease God and end the plague. Entire crowds followed them, chanting, sobbing, covering themselves in ashes. If you were unlucky enough to be sick at home, the sound of those whips cracking in the street reminded you that salvation was never private, it was loud, messy, and public. And yet, for all this suffering, nothing worked. The plague rolled on. Villages emptied. Cities stank of corpses. Priests gave last rites until their voices cracked. And still, the cures continued. Because what else could people do? When you're dying, even a terrible remedy feels like a chance. Ask yourself, could you survive this? Could you let your body be sliced open, your wounds packed with manure, your skin burned with iron? All while knowing the plague might still kill you tomorrow. Most of us today wouldn't last a single treatment, let alone the endless parade of them. Survival meant not just fighting the disease, but enduring the cures. And in the Middle Ages, the cures were often deadlier than the illness. You've been bled, smoked, leeched, fumigated, and smeared with things you'd rather not name. You've endured the bird-faced doctor and the chicken butt cure. And still, you lie in your straw bed, sweating and praying. The truth is simple, most people didn't survive the Black Death. Across just a few years in the 14th century, killed nearly half of Europe's population. Imagine half of every street gone. Half of every family missing. Entire villages abandoned, crops rotting. Doors swinging open in the wind. Survival was the exception, not the rule. For those who lived, life was reshaped forever. The plague broke old systems. Too many peasants died, and suddenly labor became valuable. Serfs who once bent under their lord's demands could now bargain. Wages rose. Some historians call it the beginning of the end for medieval feudalism. Ironically, the horror of the plague gave birth to opportunity, and in some places, a faint glimmer of freedom. Culturally, the scars ran deep. Death became an everyday companion. Art and literature were flooded with grim imagery, skeletons dancing, demons dragging souls, the danse macabre reminding everyone that death was always just around the corner. Churches filled with plague sermons, warning that sin had brought this punishment. And yet, quietly, doubt crept in. If endless prayer couldn't stop the plague, maybe something else could. Curiosity about the natural world, about causes beyond sin and punishment, began to grow. In this way, medicine crawled, slowly, toward science. But it was painfully slow. For centuries, people still clung to miasmas, to astrology, to bloodletting. The idea of germs would not arrive until the 19th century. Long after countless more had died of diseases that might have been prevented with soap, clean water, or even the humble toothbrush. And yet, humanity endured. Not through chicken butts or plague masks or holy charms, but through sheer stubborn survival. People rebuilt villages. Children were born. Families planted fields again, even when famine loomed. Somehow, after all the ashes and grief, life continued. Now, looking back, it's easy to laugh at the absurd cures, to marvel at the bird mask, to shudder at the thought of dung poultices. But remember, these people weren't stupid. They were desperate. They used the knowledge they had, the tools at hand, the beliefs they trusted. And if some of it seems ridiculous to us, that's only because we stand on centuries of progress they couldn't imagine. So, could you survive a day in their world? Could you drink weak ale at sunrise? Endure the stink of sewage in the streets, watch a chicken pressed against your wounds? And still carry hope in your heart? For most of us, the answer is no. The medieval world was brutal, merciless, and short-lived. But somehow, against all odds, enough people did survive. Long enough to hand the world down to us. And that's the quiet miracle. Not that their cures worked. Not that the plague passed. But that through pain, loss, and unimaginable fear, ordinary people refused to give up. They scratched at the dirt, lit candles in the dark, told stories to their children, and carried on. So tonight, as you lie in your clean bed, with running water, antibiotics, and heat at your fingertips, remember them. The ones who lived and the ones who didn't. Remember the bird masks, the herbs, the prayers, the chickens. And whisper a thank you. Because without their survival, however fragile, you wouldn't be here.